Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today in this policy dialogue organized by the European Policy Center to discuss the European political community in the aftermath of the Prague summit. The European political community, nicknamed the brainchild of French President Emmanuel Macron, was first presented on Europe Day, May 9th, in a speech delivered by the French president, at the conclusion of the Conference on the Future of Europe. The idea behind it was that the EU needed to fill this strategic and geopolitical void and stabilize the European continent in the wake of war in Ukraine. As initially conceived, this high-level forum for political exchange would bring together leaders of all European nations to jointly discuss and develop a common approach to the myriad of geopolitical consequences confronting Europe. From food and energy security to rising inflation, to migration flows, to the reconstruction of Ukraine, to sanction coordination, to name just a few. While this initiative was met with fierce skepticism and suspicion at first, most EU member states and non-EU countries alike got on board, and yesterday, Macron's vision came to fruition. 44 leaders gathered in Prague for the first inaugural meeting of the European political community, in what was largely hailed, I would say, as a symbolic historic success. There was room for several bilateral talks, bringing to the same table countries in conflict, discuss issues of common concern, such as energy security, and convey a message of unity against Russia's aggression and in support of Ukraine. Leaders also decided that the next meeting of the European political community should take place in Moldova next. But many questions remain regarding the specifics of this new forum for dialogue. What can we realistically expect from this initiative in the short and long term? Will the European political community become anything more than another talking shop? How will it induce action without a proper institutional setup? Are all of these 44 countries going to join the European political community as members? And finally, the $1 million question. Will the European political community ultimately help deliver security and stability for our continent? 4 outstanding speakers have agreed to discuss these issues with us and help us make sense and navigate what happened at the summit in Prague and the recently launched European political community. I'm delighted to introduce to you Corina Stratulat, head of the European Politics and Institutions Program and senior policy analyst of the European Policy Center, Florian Bieber, coordinator of the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group and director of the Center for Southeast European Studies, University of Graz, Jana, Juzová, head of Global EU Program at Europeum, and Ilke Toygür, Professor of Geopolitics of Europe at University Carlos III of Madrid. Welcome you all, and thank you for agreeing to speak at this event. I will first have a conversation with our panelists, and then I will turn to the audience for questions and answers. You can pose your question in writing in the Q&A section of your screen, or alternatively, you can raise your hand in the icon in the lower bottom of your screen, and I will give you the floor directly. I will ask you to please pose very concrete questions so that I'm able to go through all of them properly. Otherwise, please feel free to raise your hand and take the floor, and I will give you the floor. So I will start this discussion just by posing the same question to all panelists, and that is, give us your reactions and assessments of the results of the Prague meeting. How do you assess this summit? Was it a success? And also, what did you expect from this summit personally? If you had any expectations, did it meet your expectations? So without further ado, I would invite Corina Corina, would you like to go first?
Sure, Marta, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Look, to be honest, I didn't have any specific expectations, let alone big expectations. So I never risked being disappointed. But just because I'm not disappointed does not mean that that I'm not concerned. The world is getting smaller and smaller, and our problems are getting ever bigger, even for those with the will and the authority to act alone. And it is not clear at all to me at present that we really have a clue about what we are doing in response to the times that we live in. Is it positive that member states are looking beyond the EU's borders for friends, partners, interlocutors? Absolutely. Is it positive that leaders from more than 40, you mentioned 44, very different countries accept to gather in Prague? Yes, of course it is. Most of, if not all of our enormous challenges that we face together. And so international exchange, international coordination, and in the best case scenario, international action does matter. So in this sense, I would say that EPoC is a sensible idea. But while strategy might be an important part of leadership, execution is vital. How and to what extent all the right words that we've heard, all the good intentions that have been expressed will now materialize, and in the end translate into practice, into something concrete. Here I would say the jury is still out, based simply on this one meeting. And if it is still too early to tell what this initiative will actually amount to, I do have three hopes for what the EPoC should not be. First, I hope that EPoC is not utilized as a means to taunt Putin, you know, a way for the West to go all Nina on Putin. I think it would be premature to reach for such a punchline. It would be presumptuous to assume that all participants look at the EPoC as an opportunity to shout in your face at Putin. And it would also squander the chance to use this forum for an overall more meaningful and constructive purpose. I'm even tempted to say that it would probably be better for EPoC to become a talking shop than for participants to use it to score points in the tug of war against Putin. The man might have catalyzed this initiative, but as far as I'm concerned, he shouldn't be driving it. Second, I hope the EPoC is not going to be used as an excuse for the EU to deal with internal reform. For far too long now, the EU has been merely seeking temporary relief instead of really making the far-reaching structural changes necessary to deal with the causes and consequences of the polycrisis of the past decade. If the EU does not show political readiness and determination to go for more durable solutions now and to put its own house in order, even if that requires substantial reform of policies, of its governance, mind you, it might even require treaty change, then I don't know how its efforts abroad on an international stage can be taken seriously. And finally, I hope that EPoC is not used as an excuse for the EU to dodge its commitments assumed on enlargement. Yes, the enlargement process is proving rather slow and not as transformative as we might want, but nothing short of seeing the Western Balkan countries in the EU and now also the three other Eastern candidates as promised will cut it. Whatever benefits the EPoC will bring in the end to the enlargement countries, I think member states should not use them to offset familiar delays in accession. And by the way, here, I think internal EU reform could actually help the cause of the aspirants, especially if it deals with the union's absorption capacity, with the unanimity principle, or the lack of democratic acquis. And to conclude, I do hope that the Balkan countries themselves, together with Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, find the courage to stand up more for themselves and jointly strategize about how to best use their leverage in the EPoC format to negotiate progress towards EU entry. They have to better define their interest and to learn to push for their interest. And in that sense, EPoC could be an opportunity for them. All the more so since the next meeting is in Chisinau, in the Republic of Moldova. So here's my first reaction, Marta.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Thank you very much, Corina. A lot to discuss indeed. The jury is still out. This should not become an anti-Putin club, and you rather favor that is supposed to be a talking shop. And it shouldn't become an excuse not to deal with EU internal issues. Ilke, would you like to come in?
Sure, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to thank the only real EPC for the invitation. I will try to refer it as EPoC during this talk, but I think I'm a bit skeptical if it will stick, but I will be showing solidarity with you all. Thank you very much. For me, the European political community had two main objectives from the start. And the first one was being a platform to improve relations between the EU and non-EU countries, because I think there we really had a long-standing homework that the EU's relations with the neighborhood was better judged through the stalled enlargement process, the failures in the neighborhood policy, and there was a lack of a bigger vision when it comes to the continent. So this was, for me, the first aim or the first concrete contribution that might come from the European political community. And the second one for me was to open up a 21st century continental space for discussions, geopolitical and geoeconomic challenges that threatens or that makes the life difficult for the countries and the citizens of the continent. So this was for me even another exercise of rethinking multilateralism in the 21st century. So it was these two aims, the platform to improve relations between the EU and the non-EU, and the opening up the space of geopolitical the space for facing the geopolitical challenges of 21st century. So for me, the EPC meeting yesterday had a good start in these two areas that I thought in the beginning that would be useful. For the short term, we clearly have this exchanging notes practice. The leaders meet each other, socialize, discuss their problems with each other. But clearly the ultimate goal in the long run should be more policy convergence. And clearly we are far away from that step for now. For me, if we want to improve in the policy convergence dimension, I think this is more for the long run, but the institutional setup will be the key. And from where to meet, when to meet, to create a secretariat, which kind of policy issues should be included in this political space, etc., etc. These all are going to be questions to be asked. But for me, I think the organizers did a good job not bringing all of these in the first meeting, and rather leaving it open-ended, like a blank canvas, so that the forthcoming meetings and forthcoming discussions between the Sherpas and the delegations of each country would work on this. One additional point for me to judge the Prague summit is that there were many criticisms before the meeting, is that if this will rather duplicate already existing structures in the European continent. And even the Council of Europe itself was a bit angry. It's like, you're inviting our members, we already, in Twitter, I think they shared something like that, like this organization already exists in the European political space. So I think for the months or years to come, there is also a role definition is needed. And I think the European political community has added value beyond the Council of Europe. And that added value is mainly, for me, based on all these concrete policy discussions that might take place, from energy to migration, to economy, to securing supply chains, to fight against climate change, etc., etc. So this political space that could be opened with EPC between the continental countries, that would be the additional value of such an institution. If I can add one more point to this, and then I conclude. I think there's a very important discussion that we should have, and it's the like-mindedness and democracy discussion. And I think that's very much where we will get there. Okay, so I'm not going to comment very much on that, because I think it's one of the discussions at heart.
Yes.
For the first meeting, we have left it as the leaders will have some dialogue, but for the future, we have a pending task to discuss that further.
Definitely.
Back
I
to you,
think
Marta.
that's, yeah, thank you, Ilke. I think that's a very important question, and we will delve into this issue later. But you mentioned the blank canvas and a good start. So I think I take it that your general impression was a positive one of the first meeting. Jana, do you agree with Ilke's overall assessment of the Prague summit? How do you read it?
Okay, so I have to admit, when we talk about expectations before the summit, and I don't know if it was my impression or everyone's, but they were rather low, because everyone kind of knew that the first meeting is basically just to get the feel of what could be the possible areas of cooperation for the future, where each of the countries stand, what they expect from it, and so on. So in this regard, I would say there were not much hopes to disappoint. So overall, I perceived the first summit as successful, but also given that the bar was very low. For the Czech Republic, I think it was a big success. It's a historical summit for sure. Even in the size of the summit, it's very impressive, and I think the Czech presidency can be proud that they managed it. We will get maybe into the details later on, but for the nature of the political community and for its future, I don't think that much has been achieved yet. It was a first pilot phase of this initiative, but I was surprised positively with some things. And one was that, and it was mentioned by you at the very beginning, that it was already set and established that the next summit will take place in Moldova. And not only that, but according to the statements by different politicians attending the summit, there should be also a summit in Spain afterwards and in the UK. So I think this is a very good start, in the sense that at least there is some continuity ensured, and it provides at least some very basic vision that these meetings will reoccur with some regularity, the discussions will continue, and it will be developed further. So that's definitely a positive impression from the summit. And the other one was that my personal worry was that bringing together all these countries with, of course, naturally very different views, different positions on geopolitical scene and so on, but also bilateral issues, might actually hamper the discussions and somehow hinder the productivity of the exchange. But I would say to some extent the opposite happened, because one of the biggest successes of this meeting in Prague was the establishment or the agreement on sending the EU civilian mission to Armenian border with Azerbaijan. So this is a very tangible and concrete success, which of course not necessarily is connected with the whole platform as such, but it is something positive coming out from a leaders meeting in Prague in this format. So I believe there were some positive things, but let's still see how it will actually materialize in the future. And I think Ilke mentioned the problem with the institutionalization, and this is my main worry and the biggest contradiction that I see also in the initial responses to the summit, that when we are expecting some concrete projects, some concrete forms of cooperation coming from this in the future, then it would be very difficult or impossible to achieve that in this current level of informality. I will be happy to elaborate later on.
Yes, we'll elaborate later. Thank you, Jana. How will it materialize in the future seems indeed a question that concerns us all. Florian, how do you assess the outcome of the Prague summit?
Well, it's hard to add after my previous speakers have said the key points. I mean, I think I would agree with what Jana was saying, that the bar was low, the expectations were low, and so it couldn't disappoint. And I mean, I think what we saw is that there is obviously a space for European leaders to be in multi and bilateral dialogue in a format which also allows, I think, which we don't have besides, let's say, the UN General Assembly, as a space where conversations and exchanges can be held between governments, heads of governments and countries to address open questions, which might be difficult because bilateral visits are not in the cards, are unlikely due to tensions. So these spaces are important and they matter. And I think there hasn't been one in Europe. And so this is good and has meaning. The problems I would see, and we'll talk about some of them later on, but the first one is lack of vision. It's a very kind of process without vision. I mean, I'm reminded of the efforts after the end of the Cold War to have a vision for Europe. I mean, there was the Paris Charter, which transformed the CSCE into the OSCE, and that had an underlying vision for Europe, or the empowerment of the Council of Europe after the end of the Cold War. This is a very modest attempt in comparison. Now, I'm not saying we have to have a vision, but I also feel like there's a lack of ambition in this project. I mean, it's ironic because, of course, Macron is well known for his ambitions, but it's more ambitious in terms of creating something new, but not in terms of its substance. So is it a club of democracies? Well, it's not. It's got several non-democracies in it. Is it a club of European countries? Well, then I would like to see a very clear commitment that Russia and Belarus have a place in it if they are led by different leaders or in different circumstances, in a certain way. Also offering a share for Russia and Belarus in this project, of course, not in the current circumstances, right? And that kind of goes a bit to what Corina is saying. Yes, of course, you can't include Putin and Lukashenko. You shouldn't. It's a bad idea. But it shouldn't be an anti-Russian project. It should be a project against the current leadership responsible for the aggression against Ukraine. But that vision would be already helpful in terms of shaping what it is or what it could be. And I think the other worry is that the expectation that it can resolve some of the larger questions of European unity and the biggest challenges facing Europe, I don't see any evidence that this can deliver on this. I don't see how a forum which meets twice a year can deliver on larger questions of energy security, climate change. It can be at best a small drop in the bucket. And so I think the hope that this can evolve into something like that sort is, at least in the current circumstances, what we have in terms of the structure we know about or the non-structure we know about, cannot really deliver that. So I think that's it offers a great talking shop, as Corina said, but that's not enough for the challenges it poses itself and the challenges facing Europe. And this is not a problem as such, but the problem is the following: that I worry that, I mean, especially when I see following politics in the Western Balkans, people have limited, leaders, publics have limited energy for attention spans, commitments, resources. And it's already stretched thin with multiple initiatives in the region: Open Balkans, a Berlin process, EU integration, common market, and then on top of that, the supra EU. And I worry that the energies, it sucks energy from these processes, and that really makes the other ones, which are more important, which are more transformative, which lead to convergence, which lead to economic growth, to democracy, that those actually get less energy, and that leaders, in fact, in the Western Balkans or elsewhere, maybe are quite happy to praise their membership in this, which in the end doesn't discriminate on the basis of democracy or non-democracy, at least not for now. And so this is where I worry. But having a place where you can talk about issues which are not covered by EU enlargement, also with EU member states, is very important, and that is useful, as is also bringing Britain in, for example. I mean, as well as Turkey with all its problems. So I think having a format which allows for decoupling enlargement from all other more complex relations which countries have with the European Union and with other countries in Europe is extremely meaningful, but handled with care, so to speak.
Thank you, Florian. I would like to pick up on that you mentioned the need to decouple the efforts towards the European political community from enlargement. And I wonder if, there has been a lot of suspicion and skepticism that the European political community was being created as a concealed alternative, as a concealed offer for alternative to enlargement. Do you think this fear has largely been overcome in light of also what you've just described? How do you think Western Balkan countries are reading into this still at this point? And I take it from your remarks that you don't think that the European political community could be a forum to also discuss this kind of different alternative staged integrations or differentiated integration, or even a forum where there can be some progress in the enlargement front.
So shall I take that? Yes.
Yes.
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, it's obviously not a replacement or a substitute for enlargement. It offers nothing which enlargement offers. It doesn't offer foreign policy convergence. I mean, it offers coordination at best. It doesn't offer any legal changes, transformation. It's basically representing the status quo and not ambition, and at least for now. And so from this point of view, I don't think it can offer any of that. Of course, so from that perspective, it's very clear now that it's not an alternative. Now, the fact that Macron might have hoped or imagined it to be one is another story. It's, we don't have to care about what he intended. The reality is very clear. It cannot be one. But again, it's about the capital, the energy, ability to really focus on on the enlargement portfolio, which gets potentially distracted from the EPC or the EPoC. I'm sorry, and I think the key point is that even when we talk about models such as staged enlargement, the idea that there are different steps towards membership which precede full membership. Well, this is even, I mean, EPoC, the European political community, is lower than where the countries are now in their relationship to the European Union. It includes Azerbaijan and Armenia. I mean, these are countries, one of them is an outright dictatorship, which engages in horrific war crimes, well documented. So this is clearly not, if enlargement has stages, this is like the stage which the Western Balkans have passed 25 years ago. So in that sense, it's not really offering anything new for the enlargement process. It does maybe allow for the countries of the Western Balkans to have more, kind of meetings with member states, to kind of build relations, build up their ties, address some of the worries which individual member states have, why they put the brakes on the enlargement process. So it has its merits there in terms of, and of course, it really includes all of the Western Balkan countries, which is useful. So this is good from that point of view. But I think it's got, in the end of the day, I think the benefits for enlargement are marginal, and the worry is that it will just take energy away, especially from leaders who are anyhow, not all of them, fully committed to enlargement. So for them, this is a new platform to present themselves. And we saw, in fact, in Serbia, the main headline is Croatia attacks Serbia. Croats are just continuing what they've been starting. This is the headline of Politica, the most serious, quote unquote, established daily in Serbia, saying, Vucic has said, Croats are continuing what they've been doing since 1941. This is the conclusion in Serbia taken from the event yesterday, which is, of course, one of hate speech and actually seeing the West as a threat. So, the platform is too vague, so the leaders can make from it what they want to. And in that moment, it doesn't really help enlargement process as such.
Thank you, Florian. Corina, I wonder what your take is on this. Do you agree that the European political community can, in a way, distract from efforts on the EU enlargement front? And how do you see the relationship between EPoC and EU enlargement?
Yes, Marta, I have already indicated that my concern is similar, that the member states could use it actually to simply say, well, we are making progress with whatever initiatives, if any initiatives will come out of this. And so, they should feel somehow reassured that the relationship is in a good place. The same as with all the other intergovernmental projects that are happening with regards to the Balkans and that Florian has mentioned. So there is this risk that it could distract attention, that it could be used as an excuse, that it could drain energy, and of course it wouldn't benefit either parts, neither the EU nor the Balkan countries. I think enlargement is a separate dossier. It has its own tools, it has its own commitments, it has its own problems that we still need to get to the bottom of, and it should be handled separately. If we start mixing initiatives, I think we run the risk that we run after too many rabbits, and in the end we don't catch any, or we trip ourselves in the process. But again, as I think Florian has also hinted, it could be useful for these countries, you know, and for the relationship that the EU has with the Balkan countries, with now the Eastern candidates, to engage with them also by other means. It's good for socialization purposes, for building familiarity, for building trust, maybe even boosting the engagement if certain concrete initiatives or projects come about out of this. But certainly we should handle it carefully, because it would be a shame if, again, we have another reason not to deliver on enlargement.
Thank you, Corina. Now, picking up on that topic of the like-mindedness, I seem to get also the message that you know this shouldn't be the European political community shouldn't really focus too much on the democratic dimension of its members. Ilke, I wonder if you can come in on this and just tell us, how do you think leaders can reconcile in a way this values-based aspiration of the European political community with the diversity of countries attending the summit? And also, how do you see Turkey's role in the European political community? Because I think this discussion is actually a reflection of a wider discussion, because there are some member states who really believe that the European political community should be a value-based organization. So how do you see this dilemma?
Actually, this is, I think, one of the real puzzles for me, because I want the European political community or any other EU-centric initiative to be based on democracy, rule of law, and basic rights. But I'm also very much aware that the EU has the need to cooperate with the countries beyond its borders for facing various challenges. And we have seen this, for example, in 2016, when the European Union had to sign the EU-Turkey statement on refugees with Turkey, knowing that its government is not necessarily a democratic one. We have seen this now with trying to secure energy resources from Azerbaijan. We have seen all these discussions related to securing supply chains when COVID has happened, etc., etc. So I think there's an important dilemma there, and one of the key tasks for scholars that are working on the European political community is that make sure that neither the EU nor EU's programs, policies in the region are undermined with the European political community. I really care about this, but it sounds better on paper than practice. So I should confess that as well. So like-mindedness should definitely be there, and at least as the Charter of Fundamental Rights should be there, but this shouldn't be converted into something like conditionality, like stable structure. You know, so I think we are in a different platform here. So that's a bit that. The question related to Turkey, actually, I personally, as someone who has criticized the practices of current Turkish government very widely, I was quite happy that Turkey was invited and attended at the end of the day. Because again, we may like the incumbent governments or not in various countries right now, but the continent is the continent, and these countries are always a part of the continent, and they deserve to be taken seriously in initiatives like the European Political Community. Having said that, moving forward with policy cooperation with these countries, especially if the institutional structure becomes more EU-centric. Let me elaborate that in a minute. Like, if we want to go further with energy, migration, and other geopolitical challenges that we mentioned, we are very much entering the competences of the EU, and we are getting very much close to the job definition of the European Commission. Then we will, of course, see how much these institutions will get into this. But as long as the EU-centricness increases, we should be very much aware that these countries should accept certain conditions to participate in such initiatives. I know this sounds vague explaining like this, but if you let me summarize it in one sentence, Turkey, United Kingdom, and all the other non-EU countries should be on the table, because this initiative is continental. While the EU moves further with settling up the institutions of this initiative, and if it becomes more EU-centric, maybe it's not going to become that. Maybe it's going to be purely intergovernmental. It's going to have UN-like or a G7, G20-like structure, and that's another discussion. But if it becomes EU-centric, it is quite important that the EU's own principles, institutions, and policies are not undermined.
Thank you very much. Picking up on that, how do we ensure that this process doesn't become too EU-centric? I wonder, Jana, if you can tell us a little bit about the Czech perceptions of the European political community as the first country who kind of had to work on its agenda, who was there from the beginning, was very involved in setting up the Prague meeting, obviously, was organizing the meeting. How involved were the Czechs in setting the agenda, and walk us a bit through the process that led to the Prague summit, and also in your point of view, and picking up on what Ilke just mentioned, do you see that this is a risk, that it becomes too EU dominated, and that there's the risk of, in a way, antagonizing or disincentivizing non-EU countries to participate?
Okay, thank you very much, Marta. And I'm happy that I can follow up on what Ilke just said, because I would also like to some extent react to that. First, maybe I will start with the reaction, because now when we are talking about potentially this initiative becoming too EU-centric, that's something that in Prague, actually, there was strong emphasis on avoiding this perception. And that was something that really surprised me. That's one of the big changes and the big shifts from the original proposal, which came from French President Macron in May, when, of course, it was during the French presidency. It was at the closing of the conference on the future of Europe. So naturally, it seemed as an EU-led initiative. Also, at the next summit of the European Council, actually, Czech Republic was basically tasked with organizing the first summit of the European Political Community. So during its EU presidency. So overall, since the very beginning, it was clear it is an EU initiative. But what we could observe in the Czech discourse in the public space in the last few weeks, basically upcoming to the summit, was actually this attempt to completely dissociate the summit from the European Union and even Czech presidency within the EU. So, I mean, naturally, it can appear like that there is actually this must for, kind of distancing this platform from the EU, because we know that the UK and the new Prime Minister actually had quite some issues with even attending the summit and being somehow associated or cooperating with the EU per se. So maybe it could be because of that, but overall it came as a surprise to me. So at least at this initial stage, we can see that there will be more the pressure to actually disconnect it from the European Union and try to sell it as something which is not exactly part of the European Union policies. In fact, one of the high representatives of the Czech EU presidency actually literally said that factually and formally this initiative is not related to the EU at all, and it's a coincidence that the EU member states are participating. So just to illustrate the extreme to which this dissociation was somehow taken. Also, regarding the Czech influence in preparation of the meeting, I mean, originally, of course, I suppose even the Czech representatives might have been surprised when they were asked to organize the summit, because it was a very new idea, a very vague idea presented just by Macron and Charles Michel at that point. So no one really knew what exactly should be the content of it. There was also disagreement on which countries should even be invited. We touched upon the disagreements about Turkey, but also Azerbaijan, for example. So Czechs in the end actually had quite a big say in terms of the topics which were discussed. We could see in the agenda there were these roundtable basically discussions, separate roundtables, topical ones on security, energy and climate, economy and migration and mobility, which largely aligns with the Czech priorities of their EU presidency and also long-term priorities within the EU. So we could see that Czechs had a say there. But when it comes to which countries were invited, it was a product of very long and difficult negotiations amongst all member states, I would say. Quite an interesting thing also was that Czechs actually argued for inviting Israel to the meeting, at least unofficially in some informal form. But in the end, it was also controversial, obviously, and it was solved in another way. And there was a meeting with Israel under the Association Council earlier this week. So just to illustrate how difficult discussion it was, and how that even Czechs actually did not have the final say on this. Also, when we talked about relation to EU enlargement. I think this was one of the first initiatives or reactions to the original proposal coming from Macron, from Czech Republic, but also other countries who are generally supportive of EU enlargement and the European perspective of Western Balkans or Eastern Europe. And they actually strongly argued for any official proposals or any speeches to actually emphasize that this is not a substitute for enlargement process as such. And I mean, what we now see is the other extreme, which is that every time, especially French representatives talk about the European political community, they explain and try to justify that it can actually accelerate the integration of these countries into the EU, and it can help them in deepening of their integration and so on. But I think this is also bad, because I don't think we should be praising or presenting as a big success or something like that, including the candidate and potential candidate countries in this initiative. It's the very bare minimum. I mean, who else should we include when we include Azerbaijan or Turkey or Armenia or Iceland? The candidate countries are our closest partners, and they should be involved in all discussions. But in the same time, because of the very loose and informal nature that the political community has at this stage and will have probably for some time, I don't think it's that beneficial as we somehow try to sell it sometimes to the candidates for these countries, because topics like energy, climate, mobility, and so on, actually they should be discussed in the enlargement process and in much more depth, and we should integrate the countries much deeper than what the political community offers. So that's just my points to that. I hope I addressed all your questions.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much, Jana. I'm also wondering, in terms of this process of countries hosting the meetings and the say that they have in setting the agenda, but also just a general question about institutionalizing the European, the EPoC, European political community. Florian, most member states seem, or at least that seems to be a result of the Prague summit, that are against institutionalizing the European political community and more in favor of a flexible, informal structure. And we've already touched upon this in some of your comments, but do you think it can function like this? And how do we balance this informal nature of the European political community with the actual concrete political successes that need to follow through if we don't have actual institutions to support it.
Yes, thanks, Marta. I mean, I think there seems to be some kind of, I don't know how you would call this, love for, you know, the form without the structures, or however you call this obsession with creating, you know, lean international bodies which are not institutions. There seems to be maybe a kind of the neoliberalism arriving in international relations, but no. But what I worry about is that it's kind of not a very good basis for success. I mean, I've followed for many years the Berlin process, which has similar features in that it's an informal gathering which meets annually to bring together the Western Balkans with some EU member states. And the biggest flaw has been the lack of follow-up, because it was up to the hosting countries to, you know, set the agenda. And what we've seen over the last 8 years in the process is that things get discussed and then dropped. Commitments signed and that followed up, because nobody's responsible. And each new country hosting the summit wants to put its own imprint. It has its own agenda, its own issues, and doesn't really care about the agenda from the previous government. And so basically the result is that we're going to have, you know, grand announcements or ambition, and then nothing will happen. So if there's no institution, this happens. I mean, it's like, you know, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. So if you want a talking shop where you just meet every half a year and discuss, then you probably don't need it. But if you actually want to address some of the common challenges facing the European continent, then you need to have a follow-up. And for that, you need institutions. And to be quite frank, I mean, Marta, you mentioned already with the Council of Europe being, you know, a bit miffed about this initiative or so on. I mean, I fully sympathize. I mean, I think it's completely, I mean, to be quite frank, it would have been a much wiser choice to revamp the Council of Europe and have an annual or biannual high political summit of Council of Europe member states. The membership overlaps except for Kosovo, and Kosovo is in the process of joining the Council of Europe. Otherwise, it's identical. Council of Europe is committed to democracy. It has a secretariat. It has treaties. It has human rights protection standards. It has tools to fight corruption. It has tools to deal with minority rights. It has a parliamentary assembly, which brings together not just heads of government, but also parliamentarians. So it kind of begs question, why create something else when you have a structure which has been around for 70 years now, and which, you know, which got a huge boost after the end of the Cold War and then kind of been forgotten, partly because by letting in Russia and you know, other autocracies like Azerbaijan, which have systematically corrupted some of the bodies like the Parliamentary Assembly. But you know, that would be an opportunity to revise the Council of Europe. So that wasn't done, but so, you know, no use talking about things which weren't done. But what one should do is, I think, rather than linking it to the European Union, one should link it to the Council of Europe, because exactly not to make it EU-centric. I mean, the EU can be given a role, and I mean, there was a time when people actually thought the EU should join the Council of Europe as a member. But anyhow, I think this is the way forward, and there you have then structures and institutions to do a follow-up and to, you know, see about the commitments. And if you believe that there's a new body, a pan-European body needed, a treaty or so on, which follows from the discussions, then the Council of Europe would be the anchor, considering identical membership. So from that point of view, that seems to be, in my view, a pretty obvious and preferred choice.
Indeed, and there are many people, I think, asking themselves the same question. I wonder if, just going back to the issue of membership of the European political community, and Ilke, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the role of the UK. What's in it for the UK? And also, again, this is related to the discussion that we've had, that we've been having, but how do you balance the needs of and aspirations of both EU and non-EU countries?
Actually, starting from the second question, and I'm going to come back to the UK one in a second. I think this EU-centricness discussion is one of the discussions at heart, because it will also define the aspirations of the EU and the non-EU, but it will also define how much EU institutions will be in the process of creating common responses to policy challenges. I have mixed feelings. I'm going to be very honest for this, because on the one side, I want this to be a new platform and non-EU countries not to be policy takers, but rather a policy co-creation space. But then we will come to the question of how there will be, what kind of follow-up, what kind of mechanisms that would follow up in these policy questions will occur, as Florian very, very rightfully structured. And on the other side, it is a bit difficult for me to see this as a non-EU centric institution, because we have 27 EU member states, 10 potential and candidate countries, so it's 37. Then we have 3 from the European Economic Area, which already have their very certain relations. Then what we are left a bit out is Switzerland, the UK, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And Armenia, Azerbaijan, until very recently, they were also the Eastern Partnership, so part of the neighborhood policy. So the membership portfolio shows us that all these countries have some kind of very well established relationship with the EU itself from the beginning. And then you need to add the president of the European Commission and president of the European Council to the invitee list. And I assume that this is going to be the common practice also in Moldova and Spain. At least with Spain, it's going to be clear. So for me, the starting point is more EU-centric than it is not, and we can definitely discuss if this is a virtue or not. But then what could be the added value for the UK and for other non-EU member states is clearly the socialization process between co-creating policies in common challenges, because at the end of the day, candidate countries are already promising to align themselves with the EU acquis, but the others are not necessarily in that situation. So that if there's a political space between the EU and the UK, for example, this is definitely a positive thing. And one concrete thing that came up from Prague Summit yesterday was the UK was given the kind of unofficial for now, but I think it's going to go ahead, permission to participate in PESCO mobility project. So this is definitely a concrete outcome that came out of the Prague Summit. And then we have seen once again that UK willing to organize a continental summit. This is not necessarily its dedication to the EU, but it's dedication to its continental role. And for me, that is also something positive. So that the countries beyond the EU and EU's own territory has a feeling and responsibility towards the continent is something very positive. If I can add one more point, like I was in a workshop on the European political community in Istanbul, and then there were very pro-European colleagues discussing that, and there's a paper out of it if you're interested to read. And one of the things that they have said over and over again is that if the European political community would have the capacity to create Europeanness beyond the EU's borders. And I know it sounds very butterfly and rainbow when you say it like that, but I really value that perception. I don't know if it's also shared in other non-EU countries, but if something like this comes out of this, and Borrell's intervention yesterday was exactly to that, all Europeans, the dimension of all Europeans, I think that would be very beneficial for the continent itself as well.
Thank you, Ilke. Indeed, this was an element that I think several EU leaders emphasized in their speeches, not only Borrell, but also Macron. Corina, do you think this Europeanness, can we expand this to countries like Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan? Should these countries become members of the European political community? Do you think there should be a fixed criteria for membership or no?
Well, I would say that in a world of divisions and rivalries, ultimately fusion is likely to bring breakthroughs. The EU should certainly choose its teams wisely. That's quite clear, but also in full awareness that while diversity is a reality, inclusion is a choice. And if the EU starts formalizing exclusion criteria that project too much self-assurance and judge what is wrong with everyone else, it doesn't only risk making enemies and alienating friends, right? What's the title of that? But also looking rather hypocritical. You know, I think the EU is free to put values into action, to derive action from values, and to live the values that it boasts about, to live its Europeanness, right? Values of democracy, sustainability, resilience, responsibility, and whatnot. If it did so, I'm firmly convinced that it would actually inspire others. But I think in order to be able to defend and promote democracy or any specific values, to project its Europeanness, right, as Ilke said, by the power of example, I think the EU still has a lot of work, a lot of hard work to do to become exemplary. I don't think it's there yet. And in the meantime, I think its geopolitical interests are again kind of a different, separate matter that I would think, whether we like it or not, concerns countries irrespective of whether they are democratic by some specific standards. So yes, if you ask me, I think Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and so on should be part of the conversation. It's in the EU's interest that they join the talks and the exchange that is had.
Thank you, Corina. Jana, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the Central European dimension of this whole discussion. How does Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia fit into all of this? And how do you think they're seeing the follow-up of this initiative?
Okay, thank you, Marta. First, I will elaborate a bit on the question of the institutionalization, if I may, because what I'm always concerned with when we are having this discussion about membership and whether there should be some criteria and some conditions, my question would be who would be setting the criteria and who would be assessing that if we keep the intergovernmental dimension as we have established already now. I think kind of we are already beyond the point in this discussion, because the first summit already took place, and now it would be very difficult to tell some of the countries who participated that they are actually not expected to participate again, and who would have the authority to decide on this. If we really perceive it, and I see the added value there as a joint common pan-European project where everyone has the ownership and everyone has equal say. So that was just one point. And also, as Corina was saying, it would not be wise for the European EU member states to actually exclude countries like Armenia, Azerbaijan, or Turkey, because we could see it that over summer from the original Macron's proposal, which was talking about values and community of values, we actually moved towards much more pragmatic topics and a more pragmatic form of cooperation. And I'm an idealist, but I think in this case and in the current geopolitical environment and all the challenges that Europe is actually facing now and will be facing in the upcoming months and years, it actually makes sense, and we need all partners on board. Everywhere where, you know, we might not like some things, we might not share the values, we might not be fond of their domestic arrangements, but if we see the added value in terms of energy cooperation, in terms of security and geopolitical position of Europe, then we should communicate with them at least. So that's just to that. And when it comes to Central Europe, I think the political community is actually very much in line with this larger ambition and attempts, I would say, over the years of Central European countries to force and establish a closer cooperation and relations with Eastern European countries, but also with Western Balkans. So What we are seeing is, of course, certain geopolitical move towards the east of this whole community, despite the UK, Iceland, Norway being involved as well. So it's much larger platform. But I think, as I said at the beginning, like, if your question was how Eastern Partnership or associated Trio countries actually view their participation in this initiative, then I mean, of course, everyone would want to be involved. Nobody would want to be left behind. But in the same time, I don't think, and it's in line with what Florian and Corina said at the very beginning, it should not distract the governments of these countries who are aspiring for EU membership from the goal of EU membership and the enlargement process and accession process as such, because it offers much better benefits and much more meaningful and substantial cooperation and integration than what the European political community can offer in any foreseeable future.
Thank you, Jana. I would like now to bring into our discussion perhaps some of the audience questions. And I know from our participants, I know there's John Palmer who would like to pose a question. I think you can raise your question now, John.
I think he's no longer with us.
Okay. Okay. So I will now I will bring in some of the questions from our participants. We have one question that says, what can be the contribution of non-EU countries, particularly Georgia and Moldova, Ukraine, in building the European political community? Do you see any space for civil society in this process? And do you think this initiative will encourage improving smaller regional platforms? And I'm wondering what could be the implications for the EU associated trio initiative. So this question is, I think, addressed not to any specific speaker. So whoever would like to take this on. Florian?
I can just say a couple of sentences. I mean, I think I don't see us, I mean, first of all, what are the contributions of non-EU countries like especially the countries in the Caucasus? I mean, I think, I don't know about contributions. I mean, I think the question really comes back to what was said earlier about democracies or not. I mean, we know now it includes non-democracies, the club. Whether or not it should be aspirational that the countries should commit themselves to certain norms is something which I think still is not off the agenda. I think this might be useful. You know, old structures like the CSE, the OSCE, they all have normative commitments of the members, you know, not to wage wars of aggression. And, you know, I mean, you know, like Azerbaijan did wage its own war. It's nothing in comparison to what it did with what Russia does to Ukraine. But still, I mean, we have to, I think our normative ambition has really shrunk. Of course, you know, it's kind of like, it's the opportunism of we need gas. So, you know, Azerbaijan gives gas, so we are not critical. But I think this seems a bit cynical and a bit, you know, also underselling what the project of EU integration is about. And even if the countries are not in that integration process, I think we should insist, or we should have some more aspirational elements, and that affects the countries. Now, I worry about the civil society, which Teona was asking about. I mean, the Berlin process, which is, you know, I've compared before with, has had a civil society forum, which tried to feed into the actual policymakers. It's been a great initiative. I think it's been of modest success in communicating with policymakers. It's been good in creating communication among civil society. This would be impossible on a pan-European scale to organize logistically and so on. And I'm generally skeptical about the willingness of governments to hear civil society, especially in a kind of less than perfect democratic environment. So I'm not sure that the format, which doesn't even include parliaments, which are at least elected representatives in theory, has any space that civil society will have much of a voice. I mean, there could be, you know, fora organized by some of the think tanks we see represented here, among think tankers to discuss it, but that wouldn't be really a civil society initiative.
Thank you, Florian. I wonder if anyone else would like to comment on that.
I mean, I was going to mention the civil society forum that Florian mentioned for the Berlin process, but ultimately whether you do it in a way that is directly linked to the European political community or separately, of course, there's always a role for civil society. For example, if I'm thinking of the, I think it was 6 items that Macron emphasized as issues on which there was some convergence of views in his final address about the results of the summit, and I'm going to mention some of them from my notes. He spoke about a strategy to fight cybercrime, propaganda and disinformation, to protect key infrastructure on the continent, to create this resilience fund for Ukraine, to forge a common energy policy, and a common policy for young people. By the way, young people, again, also we've seen it in the context of the Berlin process, but we'll park that for a while. So if now going forward, this initiative remains lean, loose, informal, as we've heard it described here, and also if we are to avoid that, as Florian mentioned, that issues are discussed and then dropped, and we've seen that was problematic for other initiatives in the past, then maybe in Chisinau and then probably in Madrid, I don't know if we're going by capitals next, and then in London, we're sort of going to keep to this, for instance, these 6 items where there seems to be some sort of interest, if not convergence. And in that sense, civil society, broader civil society across the different participants could also look into these issues and see what they would like their leaders to consider for discussion or for decision-making when they meet next. So civil society can certainly focus concretely on whatever you want to qualify this outcome of this first meeting, and they can do so. I would say whether it's whether a forum is created for them directly linked to the EPoC or otherwise.
Thank you, Corina. Indeed, a forum on the sidelines of EPoC for civil society, that would be a good idea. I wonder if anyone else wants to come in on this, or if I can move to the next question. Okay, there's one very concrete question. Is it known when the next summit in Chisinau will take place, and how regular will these summits be? I let whoever wants to answer this, whoever wants to address this question. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe in one of the statements it was announced that it will be in spring in Chisinau. So let's suppose also with the upcoming Spanish presidency in the Council of the EU in 1 year, then it would make sense it will be twice a year.
Right. And we don't know when. I mean, yeah, in 6 months, probably, yes. We have here another question, which I think touches a lot upon the issues that you've already mentioned, but I will, in any case, read this question from Leah Marshall from Euronet Plus. For whoever wants to reply. You all made it very clear that the question is open on the structure of EPoC and concrete outcomes, but in your views, what would be an ideal format to bring results and not duplicate other forums? Also taking into account that there are varying visions on some important topics among the participants. Should some participants be asked to abide by certain principles and ideas in order to participate, or is flexibility required?
I can take this one, Marta, if you
Yes.
prefer. So actually this goes to the heart of the discussion, all the institutionalization discussion, where we go from here, and clearly there's an important conversation pending for the members of the European political community. As I said, when I look from the thematic perspective, if we think about energy, migration, mobility, economics, we are very much entering to the competences and resources of the EU. So this is again making this, for me, in my mind, this initiative more EU-centric. But for me, when we look ahead, I think this is going to turn into a coalition of the willing in every singular policy area. And I think it's good, because we see that if some concrete country is EU plus or non-EU, grouping themselves in a structured manner and trying to give answers to geopolitical challenges in the continent, I think this would be a contribution to overall security and well-being of the citizens. So for me, where we will go from here is going to be lots of variable geometries. And I think depending on the agenda setting, because we will see now who is going to set the agenda. For this one, it was easy because we had the country presiding the council, working with the president of the European Council and creating invitations and agenda, and etc. in close dialogue with the Sherpas, by the way, I should say this. So the European Council really had a very important responsibility. Now that a non-EU country will organize this in 6 months, we will see what will shape the agenda in Moldova the next time. So for me, this is going to be a bit the interesting side to see how the institutionalization will go. But to sum up, for now, this started EU-centric. For the next steps to come, we will see how the coalition of the willing will work and how they will shape the agenda for the next ones to come. And for the EU one to come, so the Spain, the next one in line in a year, I think it's going to be quite, again, like the Czechia presidency. It's like, again, in close coordination with the priorities, with the European Council itself and the Council, etc. So we are going to see a very interesting cycle. And then we will have the UK designing all this by themselves, because I really can't foresee how much of a close cooperation we can see between the UK and the EU when they are organizing the summit once again, if we can call it a summit. So to answer the second part of the question very quickly, I think there is no single authority here to put conditions and principles ahead. We will just hope that at some point there will be some kind of loose dedication to Charter of Fundamental Rights or something like that. So at least there will be a very basic acceptance of democracy, rule of law, basic rights and freedoms. But more than that, I think it's gonna move rather like a coalitions, plural, of the willing, depending on the thematic area. At least this is how I see it now.
Thank you, Ilke. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in before I.
No, I agree fully with Ilke on this. I think it will depend on what kind of synergies are created among the different members. But I have to say that, I mean, it's not surprising in the sense that this is Euro-centric, not so much because it came from Macron, but rather because if you simply look at the numbers, we have 27 out of the 44 countries being member states. So this does put the other at a disadvantage, in quotation marks, if I can say so. However, I do think that if this is to work, and in that sense, maybe theoretically one is less concerned about the agenda, is that if you want to have a constructive discussion that engages as many as possible and that speaks to the interests and the concerns of most, then you would have to go for areas that are common and joined. And in that sense, you have to go beyond European issues. So the kind of topics that Moldova will put on the agenda, I doubt will be very different than the kind of topics that concern the EU. Or actually, I would be very interesting to see if one of the countries that are further geographically speaking and who are participating, what kind of ideas they would have about the agenda. There, I guess I'd have a bit more question marks. But for the next members, can we call them already members who have taken to organize the following meetings? I think the kind of issues that they will raise will automatically be issues that are of shared interest.
Thank you, Corina. I think I saw a hand raised. Yes,
it's me.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Thanks so much, Marta. I'm Camila Martela Martinez, Center for European Reform. Thank you for a very interesting conversation, Ilke. I was wondering, when you were talking about perhaps the acceptance of rule of law, democratic freedoms, and other standards could become a condition moving forward. And my first thought was, for what? A condition to belong to a club that does what exactly? Because when it comes to the rule of law and democratic standards in the European Union, or even in the Council of Europe, there are sort of rewards for belonging to this club, and there is some sort of an enforcement mechanism if you don't. So that would be my first question. And the second question also relates to more the structure of the European political community. So is it the case that every meeting is going to coincide with the presidency of the Council of Ministers? Is there something that we know already? And indeed, what's going to happen when non-members have to organize the agenda? Who is going to be sort of supervising that in a way? Because I'm a bit afraid that the UK, a country that I appreciate a lot, is going to try to sort of dominate the show for its own political purposes. So I'm a bit worried about that. I don't know if others sort of share my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilke.
I may take the first question on the rule of law. I definitely share the concern here, and as we have been discussing, as long as this remains fluid, there is no certain commitment to basically nothing. No, it's like, as long as there is no institutional structure, as long as no written communique, there is nothing concrete on the table. For now, what we have witnessing is a platform to exchange notes, and on parallel bilateral or multilateral formats trying to solve existing problems on the table, what Macron and Charles Michel has done with Armenia and Azerbaijan in the meantime in the summit. So for now, we are seeing like a two-folded structure, one plenary with overarching issues where everyone can sign up to. No, it's like Corina was saying, like any agenda, kind of a common shared problem in the continent. And then as long as the duration of the plenary, bilateral and unilateral meetings to solve issues or discuss issues in the continent. So I think that the structure for now, as much as we can see in Prague, is exchanging notes, trying to create some kind of socialization, seeing each other and talking issues of common interest. And this is where we are right now. So beyond that, there is no commitment. The commitment would start when coalitions of the willing starts to go further with common projects and common ideas. And for this, we will need resources, both money and human resources. And then this will bring me back to the institutionalization problem. So for at this very moment, we cannot ask anyone to commit anything beyond being nice to each other, and even that was not necessarily respected at dinner in the night. So we're at that point. On the UK question, I surely share the concern as well. And for me, it's a really interesting exercise. What kind of European political community summits, or if it's going to be called summit, will come out when the UK is going to organize it in 1.5 years time, almost 2 years time now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilke. Florian?
Yeah, but just to add to that, I mean, I think I think it's, I mean, the Council of Europe for membership also didn't offer rewards for countries to be democratic, but it had also didn't use its enforcement mechanism. So I think we can be pretty sure that even if countries have to formally sign up to be democracies and respect the rule of law, I'm sure Azerbaijan would sign up and would be as much respected as it is in the Council of Europe. So, you know, like you can get away with a lot in these clubs. And okay, that's fine. I think I would agree that it's probably the best way to see about the cooperation within them. But again, I mean, I bring back the Council of Europe. They are also, you have, you know, the language charter, the minority rights convention are projects of all member states. Not everybody has to sign up, right? So then if a certain number of countries sign up, it's ratified and then it becomes into force. So this already exists when it comes to legal protection, legal rights in the Council of Europe. So again, this is for me another plea to like, let's link this to the Council of Europe, and then you can have a secretariat or a project on a particular area, which then does deal with corruption or rule of law and all of that. And again, this also would address the issue of individual host states hijacking the agenda. I mean, it's not just Britain. I mean, it's other ones as well going to have their agenda they're going to impose for all obvious reasons. And so I think one needs to have some steering, because, you know, Macron might be the father, but it's no longer under his control, right? It's no longer under, in a certain way, the EU has a control by sheer numbers over this project, but it's kind of a ship without a captain. And the question is really, you know, do you want to make sure that it has a certain path it's going to, and is not destructive? So I think from that point of view, there is great merit in having some kind of way of making sure it doesn't you know, hit the you know, the shores or go astray otherwise.
Thank you, Florian. I have one last question from the audience, and actually is addressed to you as well. During the informal bilateral meetings of the Prague summit, we could see videos of Alexander Vučić standing alone in the middle of the hall. He only highlighted complicated geopolitical position of Serbia. Is this the lowest point of EU-Serbia relations after the fall of Milosevic? And can we actually bounce back to a more productive cooperation, maybe also through the European political community?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that a video explains what happened. I mean, the videos can be very misleading. I mean, I saw it as well. It's funny to see him isolated, but then again, you know, do you want him to be talking like Viktor Orban was on the same video with, you know, the Turkish and the Azeri president? I mean, that's in a certain way the worry is that some EU member states might find that they have a friendlier company, better buddies to relate with outside of the European Union than within the European Union. I mean, in a certain way, Vučić should have shined at that occasion, because after all, he's somebody who prides himself of having good ties with everybody, and also those who are not in the room, of course. But yeah, I mean, I think from that point of view, I wouldn't overinterpret it. It certainly is something where you know, he has not expressed his preference to this arrangement, unlike, for example, Edi Rama, the Albanian prime minister, wrote the piece for Politico with the Dutch PM. But again, I think I would say it's not going to change the dynamics of Serbian foreign policy in any significant way. It should make him more comfortable than he seemed, but you know, who knows what really happened? But maybe he just had a bad day, or he's just happy to be a martyr once more.
Thank you, Florian. Okay, so we're nearing the end of this session, and just before we conclude this event, I would like to ask each of you just one sentence just to answer this question. Do you think the EPoC, European political community, is here to stay? Whoever wants to start.
I can just start, and it will be very brief. Well, it's here to stay at least for the next 2 meetings that we already know of. I would say beyond that, we'll see what comes out of it.
Thank you, Corina. Would like to go next? Florian?
Sorry, there's three. There are three. It's Moldova, it's Spain, and the UK. I apologize.
it's not going to go away because these international initiatives have a way of staying even when they're useless. I mean, remember the Mediterranean Union, which was founded, you know, and is still living, it's still alive. The Economist had a few years ago an article about, you know, international organizations which refuse to die. You know, there's still a UN body which deals with improving economic development of Europe, right? Which, you know, seems rather strange. So, you know, these things, it probably will survive another 50 years. Whether it will be meaningful is a whole different question. And there, I think, I would say the jury is still out.
Yes, very important. The jury is still out on whether it will be meaningful. Jana and Ilke.
Okay, I mean, there's not much to add. We can all agree that, yes, there are 3 more summits coming, and let's see whether the agenda will move somewhere and something practical will come out of it.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, Ilke, do you want to add anything, or?
Actually, I would end on a hopeful note rather. So I hope that it's gonna stay, and it's gonna be an opportunity for the European countries to rethink multilateralism and contribute to multilateralism in the 21st century. We always wanted the EU to step up and increase the importance and the role of the continent in this geopolitical competition in the age of mega regions, and is trying to do so. So I would rather be hopeful and hope that this is going to work out, and it's going to be a continental European contribution to multilateralism in the 21st century.
Thank you, Ilke. And on that very hopeful note, I would like to thank very much all of our speakers for your excellent insights and for this very good, lively, dynamic discussion, and for your participation today. Many thanks as well to our audience for staying with us. I wish you a wonderful weekend. And obviously we will, at the European Policy Center, the real EPC, we will continue to closely monitor this debate around the European political community. So stay tuned to our future initiatives and programming. And we look forward to welcoming you in our future events. And thank you very much. Have a very good afternoon.